Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Fit Chicks Chat. My name is Laura Jackson, and on today's episode, we are talking about sugar cravings. Now, this is a topic that is very personal to me because I used to deal with extreme sugar cravings. And there's a lot of reasons why that was, and I'm going to be sharing that throughout this podcast. But it's something that, once you've overcome sugar cravings or you don't deal with them to the extreme that you have, if you have had sugar cravings or if your clients have had sugar cravings, it's really mind blowing to look back at how all encompassing they are at taking over your life, essentially. So I thought I would do this podcast to really help to understand and give some practical tips on how to manage sugar cravings because food is extremely addictive, especially in today's day and age where we don't really have a lot of food anymore in our food system. Unfortunately, we have a lot of food like products that have been created to create this addiction. Now, again, I want to say that a caveat, this is not in lieu of medical advice. And I'm sharing, my experience and things that I have learned through my trainings and also through clients. But food addiction can also be a very real thing. So if someone is struggling with extreme food addiction or is diagnosed with food addiction, of course, that's something that you should be outsourcing them to a medical professional or again, if it's yourself, seeking that for yourself. Okay. So let's just kind of talk about this in a little bit of more broad terms to start. So essentially, sugar cravings are related to dopamine. So dopamine is one of our feel-good chemicals. So we always hear it in this idea of, you get a dopamine rush, it means that you feel good. But essentially, dopamine is not just a feel-good chemical. It doesn't just make us feel good. It's part of our reward center in our brain. And it really is one of those big master controllers over motivation, over cravings, over creating habits. Because again, it's part of that reward center. So it does make us feel good. And as humans, we want to do more of what makes us feel good. So understanding without looking even at food yet, without even looking at the actual, sugar that we're consuming or our clients are consuming or the habits that we have, I think it's really important just to understand the mechanism behind it. So understanding what is dopamine and how it works and how it's involved in our impulses. And then also how that really plays into sugar cravings and the addictive nature of certain foods. I mean, we really, like I said at the beginning, like there's so many foods in our food system that aren't actually food. They're food-like products. And in my opinion, a lot of them shouldn't even be allowed on our shelves because they're marketed as food. We've started to create a culture that we believe these products are food. And really, they're highly addictive substances that have no positive outcome with them. They're slowly breaking down our bodies. They're, creating a lot of false pleasure. There's just so many things that go into it. So, now that being said, I do love myself a gummy bear and, things at times, but we're just so misinformed of how toxic some of these foods are and how, addictive some of them are too. So let's talk about dopamine, like I said. So first of all, what does dopamine really do? So dopamine, again, it's more than our feel-good chemical. It's involved in our reward center. It's involved in habits and motivation and creating, that relationship between, oh, this is something good. This makes me feel good. And this is something I want to do again and again. So one of its primary roles is in motivating us and anticipating things that make us feel good. So it drives us to go and seek out and find things that are rewards, right? And again, things that really trigger our dopamine center, a lot of times are not good for us. They give us a false pleasure. So for example, sugar is one of them, right? It lights up all these centers in our brain. Another thing would be, alcohol for some people. Another thing would be social media or technology. Technology is really, really created to give our brains a big dopamine hit. But what happens too is it controls us, the things we want, more than just liking things. So it's not like, oh, this is a reward. I like it. I want to do it again. It also is part of the wanting. So, when you really want something, like we crave sugar, you're craving something that's really sugary. Yes, you like the taste of the ice cream, but the thought of eating the ice cream, the anticipation of going and getting that ice cream and the creamy nature of it and the coldness and the sugariness, that is actually what dopamine too is really responsible for. It's that wanting. It's that driving of feeling like, oh, I want to go get that ice cream. Even though I said before I didn't want to get it, I really, really want to go get it. So it really drives also that reward prediction and learning. So it helps us, like I said, to repeat behaviors, because we as human beings seek pleasure. We want to do things that feel good over and over again, right? Which is really interesting because, the things that truly make us feel good, they don't make us feel good in the moment. They go against our natural programming. So it's like this interesting thing. But it helps us to really reinforce that repetition and that behavior. And it also really influences a lot of our decision making and our attention. So it affects not just how we focus, but it also prioritizes our cravings. So it does play a huge role. So like, again, when we think of dopamine, we just put it in this box of the reward center and it's a feel-good chemical. It's actually so involved in the way that we will live our day-to-day lives if we have something that we do have, some sort, and I don't want to say a full addiction necessarily, but we do have this dysregulated dopamine relationship with, right? We're going to want it more. We're going to like it more. It's going to be harder for us to stop doing it. It's going to be harder for us to say no to the cookies, or our clients say no to the cookies. It's going to influence the decisions we're making our day-to-day because we're going to prioritize wanting those things. Right? So if we start to understand, okay, it's not just the sugar that I have to be thinking about, I have to be thinking about the dopamine. I have to be thinking about this relationship that I have with this food. So if we look at the dopamine loop, it's called, when it comes to sugar cravings, it's very similar to the habit loop, right? So there's a trigger. So something triggers us to have that sugar craving. Maybe we see something, like if we're going to use the example like I have of gummy bears, maybe we see a commercial for gummy bears, maybe we're suddenly out and we start thinking about how delicious we love gummy bears. There's something that triggers this dopamine loop, because again, the dopamine is not just released when we have the thing, it's released in the anticipation of it. So we have that trigger, and then next thing we have the anticipation. So we start to anticipate eating those gummy bears and the sweet taste of it and the chewiness of it. And whatever it is, for me, gummy bears, it was something, a childhood kind of treat that I always go back to. So the dopamine levels will start to rise as we're anticipating that sweet treat. And then comes the action. So if we look at it like a circle, you have the trigger, you have the anticipation, you have the action. So then you go drive to the store and you seek out, and then you consume that sugary treat. So you're like, okay, thinking about the gummy bears. Ooh, that sounds so good. Dopamine's rising. You're starting to, yeah, that's a good idea. Next thing you know, you're at the 7-Eleven, you pull in, you buy the gummy bears, that's the action, and you eat them. Then comes the reward. So the reward is when that dopamine peaks, right? And that's when we're engaging in the habit, the sugar craving. It's like, yes, I got my hit kind of thing, right? But we don't think about it in that way in the moment, because it's the same thing with social media. It's the same thing if you know what I mean. You're like, okay, it's 8 o'clock at night. That's your trigger. Kids have gone to bed. You're thinking, oh, I really want to check out, what's going on with that celebrity, or I really want to check out that influencer I'm following if they post anything new. Dopamine starts to rise. So you log into your phone, that's the action. You start scrolling, that's the consumption. You get the reward, you find the influencer, you see they've got a new post, ding, 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 right? It's the same loop. And then what happens is after you have done the action, you start to return to your baseline dopamine, and your dopamine levels start to drop. And then this, though, what's interesting, it often goes below where it was at the starting point. So before you even thought about having the gummy bears or the social media, it dips down even lower. And then this then leads to more craving. So this is when we talk about being in that vicious cycle, right? There's the physical addiction to certain foods, to sugars, that's different. But then there's also this, again, this dopamine relationship and an emotional relationship with foods too, especially if they've been a part of something that, is comfort for you or all of those things. So this is what I also think is super interesting, right? Because food is created to give us a dopamine hit, real food, real whole foods too, not just artificial foods. So our dopamine, our reward system, right, is part of keeping us alive. It's a part of our survival mechanism. So, the idea is when we eat, we're supposed to feel rewarded. So if we eat, berries, or, back in the day, we would forage, or if we would kill an animal and then have meat or whatever it was, every time we would eat, it was reinforcing, yes, we kept ourselves alive. So food is always part of the reward system. But natural whole foods, they've done studies on this, and it causes a moderate dopamine increase. So it's not that it's like this highly addictive. It's like, yes, good job. Let's do that again. So it increases your dopamine by 50 to 100%. Okay, so that's pretty big, I would think. I don't know. But then when we eat things like artificial foods, processed sugary foods, this can actually spike your dopamine levels by 150 to 200%. So double, sometimes triple what the natural foods do. So you eat, a nice salad with chicken, and maybe it's got goat cheese and berries and olive oil, and you're going to get that boost, right? You're going to feel good. Yeah, I just ate, I'm satisfied. It's part of the feeling good. But if you were to eat an apple pie with Cool Whip on it, it's going to spike. You're going to feel like really good for a bit, right? And especially if you've already done this loop multiple times and it's reinforced as a habit. So all of these modern foods, and this is part of the food developers and the food marketing system and all of it. They're all involved, right? And I don't want to sit here and be like blaming, but even when we watch commercials, right, about eating something, even cereal commercials like Lucky Charms, the kids look so happy. That's part of the anticipation of thinking about, oh, I want to eat that cereal. It makes, it's going to make me feel really good. And then we eat the cereal and it gets reinforced even more. But they're really designed to maximize this dopamine release from, the commercials, the food marketers, to the way they're built, how much sugar and salt and fat and the texturizing materials, things that make it different textures. We love things that are creamy, crunchy, right? Like there's different textures that, again, reinforce this dopamine release. So what happens when we have these two things side by side, the natural giving us 50, 100, the artificial giving us 150 to 200% increase in dopamine levels, our brain is going to say, ding, let's go to the one that is bigger, that we get more dopamine, right? Because again, if we peel it all the way back, it goes back to, we do things that feel good because it equates to, this is going to keep us alive, in our brains doesn't know the difference that the apple pie, the Big Mac, the Coca-Cola, all of the soda, all of the stuff, right? That it's not actually good for us in the long term. Our brain's just looking in that immediate moment. So it makes natural food less satisfying in comparison, which is why once you are in this loop, it's so hard to say no to the sugary treats. It's so hard to, we beat ourselves up and we think, why can't I just not eat chocolate at nighttime? Why do I keep always going for pizza pockets at lunch when I know I don't want to eat them, right? It starts this whole process, and then we blame ourselves without knowing that our bodies, not to mention our hormones on the other side of that, in addition to dopamine, with insulin, with our blood sugar levels, with all of the stuff that those foods are also spiking in our body and setting on a roller coaster, we really are in this emotional, mental, physical space to fail and to keep eating the processed foods. So it's just really, again, the first part, I think, with anything is awareness and education. Like, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know how to change what we're not told, or we feel like we want to change it and we're doing all these things, but we're not understanding why it's so hard, and we think something's wrong with us or our clients, right? So this is where, processed sugary foods, like I said, they're high in sugar, they're high in fat, they're high in salt to enhance the taste. They're also very quick absorption. So they go into our bloodstream quickly, which means we get really fast dopamine hits. It's why, even for me, when I was at the height of my sugar cravings, I remember going to the store and I think I bought like $25 worth of candy. And it was probably like 10,000 calories and I could eat it all in one sitting. And just the immediate feeling of like, oh, like when I had that first bite, because there's no protein, there's no healthy fats, there's no fiber to slow down digestion. So you're just getting that hit, that blood sugar rush, and you're also getting that dopamine rush. And then again, too, the textures and everything tastes really good. When it comes to even sweetened beverages, these are one of the biggest ones. Sodas, juices, energy drinks, right? Because they are absorbed even faster than solid foods because they have nothing in them to slow down the absorption. And also they don't make you feel full at all. So when you spike that dopamine without the feeling of actually feeling full, we end up eating more and more and more and more. And then also, we have to think about it too in the availability of these foods. So like fast food and snacks too, they're really accessible. They're ready to eat. There is no time for our body to prepare for the digestion. They're also designed to be incredibly tasty, right? So it's really important that, again, having these conversations or thoughts, and even if there's something I've said so far, you're like, oh my gosh, that's me. I didn't realize that, right? I just want you to know that this is a cycle that you can stop, right? But we can't, like I said, change what we can't change. So there's a couple of things before I talk about changing it that are going to really strengthen sugar cravings outside of just what's in the foods. So when we are stressed out, this also is going to increase your sensitivity to dopamine. It really heightens your cravings for comfort food. So you're going to be like, I want comfort. How many of you guys, you're probably listening to being like, yep, I have my comfort foods that I go to when I'm stressed out. So that increases our sensitivity, our want for that dopamine. Also, when we're stressed out, it reduces parts of our brain that are our decision-making parts of our brain, right? I've talked about this before, our prefrontal cortex. It's the part of our brain that makes decisions, that plans in advance. So when we're stressed, that part of our brain is limited because, of course, we want to stay alive, right? Stress is our fight or flight. So this leads to a lot of impulsive behaviors because we're not making them from the right mind, which is why stress is so important to manage. And it also really triggers that comfort-seeking behavior for a lot of us, right? It's a quick mood booster. We're down, we're stressed. We need something that's going to make us feel good in a moment. So if you're very, very stressed out, look and see, is there a correlation between how stressed you are and those sugar cravings? And if you manage your stress, is your sugar cravings less, right? Because we're not as sensitive to that dopamine. Sleep deprivation is another one, which is why we talk so much at Fit Chicks Academy about the importance of stress management and sleep as well. Not just, again, for balancing all of your hormones, but when it comes to, dopamine, your feel-good chemicals, it impairs that dopamine regulation. If you're not sleeping properly, it disrupts hunger hormones, it increases appetite, like all of these things happen, right? Things just don't work as effectively when we're tired. It also makes us more impulsive, as we know. And it really weakens willpower. And willpower is one of those things, right? It's not a long-lasting tool, but it's our in-the-moment line of defense against doing something we don't want to do, right? So we know, like, for example, I really want to eat those gummy bears. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I said I'm not going to do it. And willpower is going to be the thing. I'm like, no, I'm going away. I'm not going to do it. But when we are sleep deprived, that feeling, that step of like, no, because willpower can go away too, right? I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but we don't have it. When we're sleep deprived, we don't have willpower is just like weak, right? The other thing too is our environment. So it's really important that we are aware of when our sugar cravings are the highest, right? Is it certain times of the day? Maybe it's at nighttime. That used to be me. 7 o'clock, that was my snack time. That was my sugar cravings. It was like the clock ticked 7, a show went on, and I would be like, give me all the candies. I'd put on my PJs on my couch by myself, and it was like the same pattern over and over again. So knowing, like, is there a certain time? Is there a certain place? Like maybe when you go to, certain family members' house, or when you go to certain stores. Also looking at any habits that you have, right? Because habits formed around sugar consumption become second nature. The more we do something, the more we reinforce to our brain, the more we reinforce the neural pathways that this is something we want to do again and again. It becomes easier and easier, and our body likes easy. So it's just really important to be aware of anything that could be, stimulating all of that stuff. So how do we start to break this sugar dopamine cycle? So there are different things that you can do. Now, when it comes to sugar, this is the one thing I find is really hard because physically there can be an addiction to it, right? So again, what I said at the beginning, if you do have a food addiction, especially if there's trauma or emotions attached to it, definitely go and seek professional help for that. You know, for me, that was something also that I had to work through. But sometimes gradually reducing can be really, really hard for people. But if that is for you at first, you're like, okay, I'm seeing that I'm having, because more sugar creates cravings for more sugar creates, you know, our dopamine is less sensitive to it. It's like, okay, we need more sugar to get the same dopamine hit. So just starting either, you know, switching out some natural alternatives for your sweeteners. So maybe it's monk fruit or stevia. If you like that sweet taste, maybe you're swapping that out in your tea or your coffee, or adding that into your smoothies. Because at least if we're adding that, it's not gonna have the same impact on blood sugar. So you're not gonna have the same physical response to it. So we're starting to cut it out a bit. And also, again, it's not gonna have that same dopamine release. Some people will find that the sweet taste keeps them craving more sweet. But also, if you could just start to kind of cut back, if you're, you know, always having a snack, or, you know, you're always having something sweet at lunch, can you swap that out for something like an herbal tea, or something that, you know, I drink an herbal tea that's kind of naturally sweet. And that's kind of now my nighttime, like 7 o'clock, it's like a chai tasting, and it's kind of sweet to it. And if I want something sweeter, sometimes I also do cocoa powder. I put in stevia and steamed almond milk. That's another thing. It's kind of like a hot chocolate. So there are some options too, that starting with a swap. So looking at some of the sugary foods, and can you swap it for something that is not so sugary? The other thing too is, of course, there's natural dopamine boosters. So a lot of times you hear about dopamine when it comes to exercise, right? Endorphins is another one, but exercise, it really increases dopamine naturally. And this is what's cool, right? When you start to build healthier dopamine patterns, there's so many natural dopamine boosters that will benefit your weight loss goals, that will benefit your fitness goals, that will benefit your mindset goals. Like, all of them go in hand. So exercise is one that helps to increase dopamine naturally. So even if you aren't yet cutting back on the sugar, but you're adding a walk after you have it, or you're trying to swap out the time you would maybe have the sugar and go for a walk instead, you're still going to get a dopamine hit, right? It's just going to be different. Quality sleep, again, really focusing on making sure you're getting enough sleep. Social connections also boost your mood, right? It also feels good. So if you, maybe it is that you're going to call a friend, or you're going to, you know, plan to be out more. The other thing that's interesting when it comes to natural dopamine boosters is goals. You know, people can become addicted to goals too. I think I'm actually one of them. So when you set goals and you accomplish them, they give you a dopamine hit as well. So if you set a goal like, okay, I'm going to go clean out the closet, and I actually get it done, you get a dopamine hit from that. We all know that when we're like, oh, I actually, like, I'm in the midst of painting one of my rooms, and I feel like because of my son, I've had to break it up over multiple days instead of getting it all done in one day. And I feel very overwhelmed by it, as opposed to being like, if I just get this done, I'm going to feel so good afterwards. Also, learning new things stimulates dopamine. Meditation and mindfulness can help with reducing stress and balancing out dopamine. So those are just some things, starting to really focus on the good habits that you have in your life and doing more of those. And I'm a big believer in, you know, the more we add health to our lives, the less room there is for things that aren't serving us. So add, swap, replace. I always try to add more. I try to swap things out, then replace them finally. And then also making sure your space is set up for success. This is a huge one. You know, if you are somebody who deals with constant sugar cravings, do not have sugar in your house. If you deal with constant chocolate cravings, don't have chocolate readily available in your cupboard. Because again, if you're stressed, you're tired, you are overwhelmed, willpower is low, right? Hormones are out of whack, you're going to want it. So even for me, still to this day, if I want something, I just make the decision intentionally, and I'll drive to the store and get it. I don't resist it, but I say to myself, do I want to drive to the store and go get it? Yes, I do. And also avoid those trigger areas. If you notice that there's some places or things that you do, try to have an alternative for that. Now, sometimes that's not possible, but if it is, try to avoid things that are prompting your cravings. So those are just a couple of things to help you with the sugar cravings. Now, the thing is too, is when you're trying to get rid of sugar cravings or rebalance habits and all these things, there is that physical response too, right? So usually the first couple of weeks, you're going to go through a heightened desire for the thing you're removing, especially if you have something physical, like sugar has given you that dopamine hit. Also, it boosts blood sugar, you get a rush, right? And then there's an emotional side to it. So if it is something, you're probably going to want it more during the first couple of weeks. You're going to probably feel a little bit cranky, maybe a bit sad because you're missing something. Also, if you're using it to buffer another emotion, and you might even have physical symptoms. We all know this, especially again, been there. Cutting out sugar for me, it's the worst headaches. The same thing even with coffee. I've been trying to reduce my coffee consumption and I tried to cut it out completely and I had the worst headache, right? So understanding that withdrawal phase and setting up your life for success around that, or your clients, helping them with that. The other thing too is after that comes kind of the adjustment phase. So it's where you're going to start to feel things emotionally. Maybe you're going to start to even out. You're going to have less sugar cravings. It's almost like, as soon as you stop, you think you're going to feel better. It's like you feel worse, they're higher, and then it starts to level out. So you don't realize you're not craving it as much. You're probably going to have more energy. You're probably going to start to feel like you've got some new habits going on because now we've been repeating this pattern. And then after that, the next, few months into it, and then long term, you're going to probably see a whole new relationship with food, especially if you start to replace, the thing too, it's very easy to replace one craving with another craving, right? So maybe it goes from a sugar craving to now we're like, we go to a starch craving. But if we don't replace with processed foods, if we replace with real whole foods, you're going to have this whole new relationship with it. Also, you're probably going to see yourself being able to handle different stress better because, again, you're not having these highs and lows, and it's going to be easier to resist temptations. It's crazy to me to think that I am someone now who can say no to sugar. Honestly, from where I was at, like I was that person who literally put a cake in the garbage and squeezed, I don't know what the word is, squeeze dish soap all over it, because I didn't want to go fish it out of the garbage. That's how addicted I was to sugar. I could eat probably 3 chocolate bars plus candy in a sitting. Like I would never, it was like I had a hole that I could not fill. I could not get enough. But the more you do it, it's like suddenly I look back because I have created those new patterns. I have rebalanced my hormones. I have rebalanced my emotional relationship with it. And it just will feel, it's just the new you. It will now be you. And you will realize that you don't have to be afraid of it, that you can enjoy it in moderation, which is a word I never liked, but I always like to follow the 80-20. You realize you can actually have it. It's not going to throw you back into that loop. It's not going to throw you back down that rabbit hole of feeling like you need sugar all the time. But it's just making sure that you're always on yourself, like if you see yourself suddenly that you're not sleeping a lot and now you're getting really craving, okay, let's focus on my sleep again, right? Or you feel like you're going through a really rough time and you don't have an outlet, try to find an outlet, whether it be someone to talk to, whether it be journaling, whether it be exercise, that you're not going back, because we all have our patterns that we want to go back to. And if you see that strong craving starting to intensify, then, that's where you got to start to look again at the habits. So if you ever see yourself acting on cravings without thinking about it, you're like, okay, wait a second. Because whatever we're conscious of, we can change, right? Awareness is the very first step. So as soon as you notice, okay, I'm suddenly acting on cravings again without thinking, I'm just doing it, this is where we start again. So the more we focus on eating real whole foods and balancing our blood sugar, it's going to make it easier too, but it's that initial part of getting it out. Okay, guys, so that was our podcast today, all about sugar cravings. I hope that this was good for you guys. I really found it fascinating as I started to learn more about sugar and how it affects our body, and for my clients, just how all-encompassing it can be and how it hits us on so many different levels. But really, the habits that even we talked about today, not do they just benefit, your dopamine, but they also benefit all the other things that are involved, whether it be in muscle building, weight loss, your health goals, overall energy, all of the areas, right? As we start to focus on shifting this. And everything we talked about today applies to, anything that's also, high dopamine rewards, like again, social media, if it's something you want to get rid of or reduce, you can also utilize what we talked about today. So hopefully this was helpful. Remember, make sure to check out fitchixacademy.com. We've got some awesome certifications coming up. We have our fitness and nutrition expert certification. We've pulled it out of the vault. It is starting on October 30th. We also have our holistic nutrition weight loss coach certification, which is starting again at the end of November. So if you want more information on that, go to our website, check it out, and hopefully that we can keep this conversation going and help you implement this even further with your clients and in your own life. Okay, everybody, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you guys next week. Bye.